Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of One Pot for All. I hope you're doing great. For me, today is just one of those days. It's gray, it's cold, it's freezing. I went for a walk earlier and it was just horrible. My hands completely numb. Everything was just so cold. And I had on really warm clothing too, so I don't know what happened, but I am very ready for sunshine and spring. We had a couple of days, like beautiful blue sky, sunshine. It was lovely. I loved it so much. But now we're back to the beautiful spring. European spring is just gorgeous. It's just horrible, actually. It's gray, it's cold. You don't want to leave your house. You don't even want to leave your bed in the morning. Honestly, it's just no. But anyway, I hope where you are, the weather is better and maybe we will face a little bit of sunshine soon. But again, I'm so ready for spring. I'm also ready for summer, to be honest, but I'm at least ready for spring. And because it's March, hopes are high because it should be happening soon. I mean, I can't really wait to sneeze around all day because this is also going to happen in spring. But other than that, I'm just ready for some vitamin D because, oh my God, I need it. So as the Oscars are over, we are now going to talk about random topics again. Now that I've talked about movies for at least 2 weeks, I think I'm ready for something other than that. And today's topic is going to be following trends. So I think at one point or another, we've all been victims of trends here and there. And I thought it would be an interesting topic because lately I've realized I've started to follow some trends again. And I didn't do that for a long time. So I thought, why not just discuss it on the pod? Because it might be interesting and I'm very intrigued to hear what you guys think. So following trends. Is there a need to follow trends? This is a question I keep asking myself because sometimes I feel like I'm too young not to be stylish anymore or to know what's going on. But then also, I have these days where I'm like, okay, maybe I'm just at a point in my life where I don't need to follow every trend. I think there is a certain pressure sometimes, especially when you're younger. You want to keep up, everything that's new and cool and hip and trendy. And like trendy might be one of the worst words invented ever, but other than that, there is this kind of pressure. And I think it gets better the older you get, but for example, when you're in school and you want to fit in with your group of friends or you look up to certain people, for example, to musicians or actors and actresses, etc., you want to follow the trends that they set and you want to be part of that and you want to be cool and you want to know the latest things and you probably know the latest things, but you also want to incorporate them in your own style or behavior or whatever, trends can be found anywhere. So I think it's quite interesting to think about that because even as an about to be 30-year-old, I still sometimes feel that pressure. And I know that at this point I put it on myself, but I also enjoy following trends. So it's not like it's always a negative thing. It has its perks and I really like it sometimes. I enjoy it sometimes. And I think it's an interesting topic to discuss because I think everyone can relate. If you're male, female, young, old, we've all been victims of trends for sure. And we all know what that feels like and we all know what that pressure feels like. But we also probably all know what it feels like to be part of a trend, how good it can feel or not. And I think this is why today's topic is going to be pretty universal because we can all relate. So when you think about a trend, you almost immediately know a trend is going to be temporary. So how long does a trend really last? And as trends can be found anywhere, not only in fashion, but that might be the first thing we think about, how long does a trend last? How long does it go on? Is it decades? Is it years, months, weeks, sometimes days? Anything is really possible. So when you want to decide if you want to be part of a trend, I think it's important to understand, is that something I want to be a part of for just a short amount of time? Or is that something that I'm going to make part of my life, maybe experience it every single day, or maybe at least for a longer amount of time? Because no one can really tell how long a trend will last. Sometimes you can probably guess and you can probably try to estimate, but other than that, I think it's very difficult to understand trends. Sometimes they last longer and sometimes they basically vanish immediately. Now, let's look at certain categories where we find trends regularly. And as I've mentioned before, fashion has to be the one thing that comes to mind. I mean, the fashion world is full of trends which change sometimes really quickly, and then sometimes it takes a while. If you look back on the history of fashion, I think at this point in time, when we look back on certain fashion eras, it's like we can tell this is the style of the 90s and this is the style of the 70s or the 40s. So we do think about fashion in decades as time goes on. But when we look at fashion right now, at this point in time, we can tell there are so many kinds of trends which were not around 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and which will probably not be around in 5 or 6 years, although we're still in the same decade. But certain trends, especially when they're smaller, they really lose significance. But you can, of course, always make it your own. You can try to keep up the trend for yourself if you enjoy it, of course. But when we look back, certain fashion trends have a longevity to them and others really don't. Others lose significance and they vanish in time and they're never heard of again. But when it comes to fashion, that usually doesn't happen. Everything reappears. I mean, we're currently going through the 90s again. I don't understand why I was born in the 90s. I'm going to tell you it wasn't pretty and it's not pretty now. But certain things are coming back and they can be incorporated into a more general or basic style. And even if you like other kinds of fashion, I think you can pick some trend from every decade and just make it your own. That is an option. Fashion is so versatile, so flexible, full of variety, which is why fashion just works on everyone and why it is so great. You just have to want to make it your own. And as some very famous people always say, you just have to wear it with confidence and it'll work. And it really does, actually. But other than that, I'm just trying to say that certain trends, even though you might forget about them when you think about certain fashion eras and certain trend eras, they usually come back and you can just pick your favorites from all the trends out there. And just to make this a little more personal, here's an example from my life. So I follow two women on YouTube and they both do fashion. They both have fashion YouTube channels. And one of them is very into the latest styles. She knows what's new, what's hip and cool, and what you should be wearing. And she'll probably know all the trends before we do and before, non-fashionistas know. She'll pick everything up from the runways and she'll make it wearable, comfortable. She'll make it look very cool, and she's very on trend every single time. And the other woman is also kind of on trend, but she has a style that makes me think about the 50s, the 60s, sometimes the 70s. And this is the kind of style that I lean towards much more than the current 90s revival and other kinds of style. I don't know why. I think it's just a matter of personal preference, but this is what I'm into. I like the style of the 50s, the 60s, the silhouettes from the 60s especially, and then also sometimes the 70s. Doesn't always work with my body shape, but I'll make it work, You just have to make it work on your body. This is how it works. So there is always a certain revival of the 60s and 70s. There was just one a few years back, but now that we're going through the 80s and the 90s again, things are starting to change. But that woman on YouTube, she is still purchasing new clothing items. She'll find on all of the latest fashion websites, high fashion, or all of the various fashion brands from low price to high price items. But it's very interesting because those trends and those things that she shows in her videos, they're not the latest trend. They're not what's actually in right now, but she just makes it her own. She picks certain items from what we can find in stores at the moment, and she just makes it work for her 60s or 70s style. And I like that a lot because, when I follow trends, sometimes I really like something oversized, which is usually not very 60s, for example. So how am I going to incorporate this into my wardrobe? It depends, of course, on my body shape, but if that's a trend I want to go for, I just mix it up. Sometimes I do 60s days and then I do very like casual or comfy days. Sometimes I look like I am not interested in fashion at all, which is also great, but I just pick my favorites from all the different kinds of fashion trends out there. And I can't wait for another 60s, 70s revival, which is going to come. It's always going to reappear, which is great. In fashion, you can always rely on a comeback, which is amazing because it'll definitely happen. But this is how I do it. So there are trends out there, and sometimes I look at the woman who's always on trend and I'm like, oh my God, that's a great outfit. I'm just going to copy this right away. But then I think about, okay, but what is the style I really, really like? And then I go more into the 60s, 70s era, and then I pick from the other girl. And it's so interesting because certain trends are amazing and I like them, but they won't look good on me. So I choose not to follow them. Although I like them, I like to see them on other people. It's just like, make your own choices. I mean, this is always what we will end up with, make your own choices, listen to your heart. But it is like that, I mean, don't follow trends you don't want to follow. I mean, that should be clear without me making this episode for you right now. But what I'm trying to say is I just pick my favorites from all the trends out there. And this is how it kind of works for me. And when I think about trends, of course, I have to think about social media. And I'm going to pick Instagram as an example because I think this has to be my favorite social media platform. And you can find so many kinds of different trends on there. It is what you post. So for example, there was a time where everyone just posted their food or like everyday situations. Then there was the time of the selfie. And as I said, those trends still last. We still post selfies, etc. But sometimes they grow a little weaker and sometimes they grow stronger again. It really depends on the trend itself. But also think about the style. We used to use a lot of harsh Instagram filters. Like I know a lot of people used Mayfair or Aiden or I don't know, all of the other, like Rise is one of the filters, I think. But does anyone still use Instagram filters? When I edit my photos to look a certain way, to make the feed cohesive and to add a certain style to every single picture, but then when you look at all of them, they all look kind of similar. I only use the iPhone app, so where you can edit your pictures on the iPhone, and I try not to edit anything really. I just try to either turn down the saturation or something like that, or turn it up, depends on the picture, of course, but I try not to edit anything too much. Maybe sometimes I turn down the brightness or I turn it up, but other than that, those really harsh Instagram filters where you basically also changed the color and the style of the picture, those days have long gone, right? But we used to do it and we used to love it. And people like Kim Kardashian, they always used certain filters and then some people would copy it to make their feed similar and it worked. But as I said, it was just a simple trend. And now trends are just very different. When I think about people who are a little bit younger than me, what they post is so different to what I post. I still try to control my feed and my pictures, and I want everything to be very cohesive. And I like certain topics and themes, but other people just post random things like doorknobs or something. And I think actually it is also a kind of trend. I know that. It's not a trend that I want to follow, but it's a trend I like to look at. I've seen a lot of pretty doors and windows lately and just random corners of streets and buildings. Some things I would never post or photograph or just look at for a longer amount of time. But for me, it's very interesting to see those different kinds of trends. And now that we're talking TikTok and Reels, Of course, we know what kinds of songs are trending. I think this is like the biggest part of social media at this point. If you jump on a trend for a dance, if you jump on a Lizzo song, for example, or if you jump on something else, what's really on trend lately in my feed. But again, it depends on everyone's explore feed. But I'm interested in traveling, so I get a lot of like one day in Copenhagen or one day in Berlin or my 3 days in Paris. And then it's a beautiful reel with a beautiful French song, for example, or just daily life or things I've been interested in lately. And it's mostly everyday things, but they are aesthetic and they are pleasing to the eye, I guess. And yeah, this is the kind of trend that I want to follow, that I've jumped on, but it's not always a trend that is one of the most famous or most popular. It's very niche specific. I wouldn't call traveling a niche. I think that's one of the biggest topics on Instagram. But yeah, it depends on what kind of topic you follow, what theme you want for your Instagram. So there are so many different trends to choose and pick from, but they change so quickly too. And also sometimes they can ruin it for me. For example, a few weeks ago, Miley Cyrus's Flowers came out, and it is one of the coolest songs I've heard in a while. I found it, I loved it, I listened to it on repeat. But then what happened? I saw it on Instagram and TikTok every single day and many times a day, and it was just too much. Now I don't really like the song anymore. So these trends can really ruin it for me sometimes. So whenever there is a very cool and new song out there, I try not to listen to it too much because it might blow up on Instagram and social media, and then I just can't deal with it anymore. That one specific Lizzo song that everyone danced to? I'm not a dancer. I don't like dancing, but I was so close to recording myself dancing this dance. So I feel like sometimes those trends pushed onto people, when there was this really specific Lizzo song everyone started dancing to. I was really close to recording myself dancing to this song. Thank God I didn't, because if I had recorded this video of me dancing to Lizzo, no, I would have never opened Instagram after that. I could not look at my feed. I would delete it. I would hide it away because this was a very short-lived trend and it was fun and it was cool while it lasted, but it's not always necessary for me to jump on everything. And I keep realizing that. And for example, now it's not really popular to add hashtags to your posts, to your photos and reels, etc. But we used to add so many hashtags. I remember a time where it was so cool to add at least 20 to 30 hashtags. I think actually 30 hashtags is the most you can do. But, we don't do that anymore. So I feel like hashtagging was also a kind of trend, or not using hashtags might be the actual trend right now. So especially on social media, these things are very short-lived, and it's probably really wise just to pick your favorites and not to feel tempted by a dance or something like that. But while we're on the topic of music, think about music in general, how much these trends change. So when I grew up, I started listening to, for example, Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys, so more like pop songs. But then as I grew older, I was interested in indie and rock, maybe even punk rock, because that was the kind of music that was out there. I'm a huge fan to this day of Green Day. I love this band and I love their music, but they were so popular around 2004 when they had their little comeback, and all of the other bands that sounded similar just came up with them, and not through them. I think they kind of came up on their own, but because there was like a rock, indie rock or a punk rock revival. And then this is how it continued, then other certain music genres appeared, and this is also how it is nowadays. Of course, you can always find different genres, but as I'm not the biggest advocate for popular music, I don't want to tell you what music is on trend right now because I really don't know. I think Miley Cyrus and Taylor Swift, people I still listen to from way back when, still do pop music in a way, and I still enjoy it, but there are so many different kinds of music out there. But in my opera episode, I told you I love classical music, and I listen to just random popular songs that are on trend, which I usually find on Instagram and TikTok, etc. And then I just listen to whatever I want, old songs or classical music, because I really don't know what music is out there right now. I just don't know enough, so I'm not going to tell you what's on trend right now. But that's what I mean. Music trends change so much and so regularly, and also sometimes so quickly, but they can also last. And I think when you found your favorite kind of music, you kind of tend to stick to it. Taylor Swift fans are Taylor Swift fans even after like 10 years, and Harry Styles fans probably stick to it as well. And I still listen to Green Day because I discovered them in 2004 or 2005, and I love their music, and this is why I still listen to it. But as they were on trend, I picked it up and I just took it with me. I've taken Green Day with me for years now, although they're not on trend anymore, but they're my kind of music. And when they come out with new music, I usually enjoy that too. So I just like them, even though they're not on trend anymore, and maybe miss out on so many other artists which are on trend right now. But this is kind of how it works. And then, of course, think about other categories where you can find trends. Maybe those categories are not as obvious as fashion, for example, but what about the food world? I mean, does anyone remember the horrible diets from the 2000s? And then there was the time where being vegan was on trend and highly popular, although many people had been vegan long before and stuck to that kind of diet for a long time before it was on trend. And now I see a lot of videos for keto diets, which I have absolutely no knowledge about. And then, for example, of course, there are superfoods, which were on trend for a while, maybe they still are, or high protein foods because we want to be fit, we want to be healthy, and we're always told we're not eating enough protein. I think the food world is one of the most dangerous ones because they can really mess up your body. So if you want to follow a certain trend, make sure it's a healthy one, and make sure that you still eat enough, first of all, because I remember the early 2000s and what I read as a child and as a teenager in horrible magazines, but also make sure that you get all of the ingredients that you need for a healthy and balanced diet, of course. But I think the food world is one of the trend-setting worlds we kind of ignore when it comes to trends, but it's one of the fastest growing trend worlds out there. Then, of course, there is interior design. And I don't think I have to go into too much detail because that's basically fashion for your home and it works basically the same way. Lately, I've seen a lot of Danish pastels and wavy mirrors and big bowls and chunky vases. And I really like that trend, but I think putting something in my home, I will think about it for weeks. And if I don't like it after a few weeks, it's a trend that I enjoy in other homes, but I could not stand to look at that for a long period. And when it comes to my home, I want to live in that home with the interior design choices that I've made for years, decades, for a long time, I couldn't stand anything red or pink for a long time because it's just too bright. I wouldn't like it. I'm into earthy tones, neutrals, like every boring person, but that's what I like, I don't mind a pop of color, but those very high colored Danish pastel homes, couldn't deal. I couldn't do with pastel green and pink and blue and yellow, and it just looks very unreal to me. But some people really make it work. I also follow a woman on Instagram. She does amazing interior design. She upcycles a lot of furniture, and it's so amazing to look at because everything fits perfectly into her home. And she currently and constantly makes me pick out new designers I want to follow and just experience new design options I haven't even thought of before. So that is a very interesting process, but it's not always for me. And don't forget that trends not only occur in random categories such as fashion or food, they can also occur in more serious categories such as politics. So there are certain trends you can see throughout history, for the history of the world, that also reappear. When there is a recession or a lot of unemployment, people sometimes tend to lean towards more conservative politicians. Maybe things like Me Too or feminism are viewed as trends by some people who don't want to live those things and don't want to make them part of their lives or identity. This is also something that you have to keep in mind when we talk about trends. And then let's talk about one more category, and that is movies and TV shows. I remember a time when different kinds of TV shows had certain substitutes and had certain follow-ups. For example, there was a time when Pretty Little Liars was really on trend. There were so many other shows that popped up with the same sort of style that you just couldn't really decide what to watch, and then everything else was really not good. And then, of course, when Breaking Bad came out, there was Ozark, and then certain other shows make up certain trends that then are followed by other producers, other creators, and sometimes that is amazing. Sometimes it really works because those shows can stand on their own. For example, Ozark and Breaking Bad, they don't have anything to do with each other anymore, and of course they have some sort of similar pattern, but Ozark has become its own thing. And maybe shows that have originated from certain shows like Better Call Saul, which has originated from Breaking Bad, has lived on for many years after the original show had already ended. So it's not always dependent on the mother show, I'm going to call it that. But sometimes those trends in film or TV, they just create horrible substitutes and horrible little TV show children, which are just no, you can't even watch these shows. So yeah, but they also set certain trends. So what is the moral of the story? I mean, as always, the older I get, the more I realize there is no need to feel any pressure to follow any trends. I only follow trends I like, and sometimes I follow them for a while and I just make it part of my identity. And then sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'm just not really interested in a trend anymore and I just let it go. That always works. But as trends are mostly reoccurring, there's always a chance to pick it up at another point, If you miss out on a trend, it might come back. Another dance will come up, or when it comes to fashion, it's always reoccurring. Just wait it out, wait for the 70s to come back because they will have their 100th revival at this point. So just wait for certain things to pass. And then if you really like them, just incorporate them. Just make them your own. I think this is how it works for me. And I think this is how it works best for a lot of people, Not any trend is for you, and that is a good thing. Sometimes it's not good to follow a trend. And I think the obvious thing is to just find a balance between what you actually like and what you don't, even though you might feel a certain pressure or you might feel a need or even want to follow something. Sometimes it's just not that necessary, Think about me and the Lizzo dance. It was a good choice that I didn't go there, You will grow into certain things and out of certain other things. So just wait if you like a trend enough to just take it with you, or if you don't like it enough to just make it your own. I think that makes the most sense, at least for me, And I think wanting to be on trend is not a bad thing. Sometimes when you want to be on trend and you want to follow the latest things, it always has a really awkward connotation, especially if you are not the age that you expect to follow the trend. If you're older or younger, sometimes it can look really awkward. But I think, again, if you make it your own, it won't, because you just wear something with confidence or listen to whatever music you like. I mean, sometimes it just really doesn't matter. You don't have to follow every single trendsetter out there. But I think if you're really into something, you will automatically make it yours, if it's on trend or not. All right, that sums up this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below. I can't wait to talk to you again next week. Bye. Have a good day.